Real world strength is awesome, sandbags build it. Here's my quick disclaimer. I think sandbags are cool, but so is everything else. I know there are a lot of lifters out there who have, for some reason, made it their life's mission to defend one training style over another, but that's not my goal. Before moving forward with this video, I want to make sure everyone knows I'm coming from a place of everything is good, everything works. I don't care to join the sandbags versus barbells or sandbags versus anything else debate because I truly believe it's a pointless debate. I will be making a case for sandbags today, but please know I am willing to accept arguments for other training styles too, assuming they're based on reason. We talk about this stuff because it's fun. I hope that's how this video will be seen, as an attempt at talking about the benefits of one training style over another, not because I believe these things are necessarily absolute truths, but because training is cool and it's fun to talk about. Here are my thoughts on sandbags and the idea of real-world functional strength. What is real-world functional strength? Well, to start, in many ways it's a funny concept, as if to say the gym exists in some kind of alternate dimension apart from everything else. The gym is as much the real world as the woods are, but setting that aside for now, I think for many of us, when we hear real-world functional strength, the image that comes to mind is that of a farmer throwing a hay bale, a construction worker carrying a sheet of plywood, or maybe some kind of old-school lumberjack dragging timber through the woods. These things all seem different from what typically goes down in the gym, like they would require something else, something more, and that causes a kind of rift to form between what's considered gym strength and what counts as real-world strength. Rightfully so, there is a difference, a couple differences actually, I'll get to them soon, but first I believe it's necessary I quickly outline what truly separates the two: purpose. Outside the gym, you typically do things to accomplish some kind of task. The carpenter moves the plywood so he can build something. The lumberjack drags the timber so it can be processed into the plywood. Real world indicates there's a tangible external purpose for the work. Adaptations to the body might happen from that work, but they're secondary to completing the task at hand. In the gym, the adaptations are the goal. You might say, rather than build in the barn, we go to build that barn door back. Rather than throwing hay bales because they need to be moved, we throw around barbells to get better at throwing around barbells. This difference in purpose is everything. It fundamentally changes how we approach the work. In the gym, we do just as much training as is needed to cause changes. We push for progressively heavier weights over time, often purposefully lifting from disadvantageous positions to bias one thing over another, following structured programs designed with the sole purpose of improving our bodies in some way. Muscle is strategic, often built with the intention of attaining a kind of perceived ideal, a focus on the V-taper being a common example. The outside world and labor isn't about that. Everything is second to getting the job done, and efficiency is the name of the game. What's the least amount of energy you can use to get the task done? In what ways will the body shape itself to make repeated efforts less of a challenge in the future? Strength and muscle are likely to happen as the body adapts, but as a byproduct of the work, not because they were the point. There's also typically a fundamental difference in volume. In the gym, you may have the goal of increasing max strength in the 1 to maybe 30 rep range. Some go above that, but I think most people usually hang out in that range. But real-world tasks typically require you to do something many more times than that. In a real-world scenario, a job will probably never require a person to lift a very heavy, perfectly shaped thing once like you would in the gym. More likely, it will mean interacting with light to moderately heavy, awkwardly shaped things many hundreds of times. You might say real-world strength is the strength to push through discomfort for a long time, to keep going when you're worn out. Real-world strength is as much about the mind as it is the body, and it's much more about having a body that functions well in unpredictable scenarios than it is having max strength in a predictable one. That's the other main thing to consider. Real-world scenarios aren't always predictable like they are in the gym, and they're often much less comfortable. You know what a dumbbell is. It's always the same thing. A rock is never the same. You never quite know what you're gonna get, so you must be able to adapt. You could argue that any training tool and any training style has the potential to prepare you for the real world, and to a point you'd be right. Lifting a barbell, for example, will definitely make you better at interacting with the natural environment or wherever you happen to be when compared with doing nothing at all. Max strength is always a useful thing to have. It's missing something though. The barbell is fundamentally different from what's required in the outside world because it was designed with strength in mind. It was made to be lifted. It's predictable and it works with you, creating the perfect environment for maximum development. Nothing else is like that. A sheet of plywood doesn't want to be lifted. A downed tree doesn't want to be dragged. You must accommodate them, rather than them accommodating you like a barbell does. This is where sandbags come in. At the base level, I believe the reason sandbags are superior for building real-world strength is because they mimic real-world environments. They're uncomfortable to work with, they're awkward, and lifting them is never easy. They force you to push through fatigue in a way that just can't be replicated with a training tool designed with your comfort in mind. I believe this is the base reason for sandbags being superior that exists below all other things. Sandbags hard, real-world hard, carryover. There's much more to it than just that though, so let's get to some of the finer details. Say you do need to lift something in the outside world, maybe a large rock you found buried in the garden, maybe a log you need to move from one place to another so you can chop it up, or probably more realistically in a world where most live in city apartment buildings, maybe a friend is moving and you need to lift a couch down some stairs. For any of these scenarios, the sandbag is a superior strength building tool in every way because it represents weight in its most basic form. It's shapeless, or rather it has a shape, but it's a rudimentary shape. On a scale from most basic thing to lift to most complex thing to lift, sandbags are at the bottom, beneath most everything else, granting carryover to everything above, where those things above might not carry over to those things below. Maybe an example. Say you're trying to learn algebra, but you don't know what numbers are. That's an impossible scenario. Comparing this to real-world strength, you might say building the strength to lift a sandbag is like learning to count to 100. Once you know the basic numbers, you can go off and do whatever kind of math you'd like, algebra, trigonometry, whatever, because you know how to count. The foundation is there. Sandbag strength is a foundation, like numbers are. Once you have it, you can go off and apply it to lifting couches or rocks or logs. The couch would be the algebra in this example. I'll always remember Brian Alsru's quote from many years ago, "If you can lift a 300-pound sandbag, you can lift a 300-pound anything." I believe that's true. Sandbags represent the base form of objects. They're the fundamental version. I had a comment about this idea recently. No shade here, by the way. I actually really appreciated it because it made me think. But to paraphrase, the commenter's argument against sandbags for real-world strength was that not everything in the real world is bag-shaped. True, not everything is. But you know what nothing in the real world is shaped like? A perfectly balanced barbell with 45-pound plates on each side. It's not that sandbags will have complete 100% carryover to every possible task there is. It's that they're likely to have the most carryover. Aside from the fact that sandbags teach you to push through discomfort and that they represent the base form of objects, what else is it about them that makes them so good for developing real-world strength? Well, because they're awkward, they teach the body to work as one solid unit rather than as a collection of individual parts, and they build all those stabilizer muscles that never get worked when everything is predictable and stable like it is when training in the gym in the typical way. The stabilizers. Everyone seems to be hooked on the idea of stabilizer muscles at the moment, and lately for some reason, whenever I hear someone talk about them, my response is something like, yeah, who cares, this again. When brainstorming for this video, I realized I've become a bit disenchanted by the idea of the stabilizers being this magical thing, but I shouldn't be. I think it's just because I've been talking about them for so long, and because people often have a tendency to over-exaggerate when discussing them, but preparing for this video made me remember how cool it really is that sandbags build the stabilizer muscles. There really is a feeling of cohesiveness you get from training with sandbags, as if every part of the body is connected and feeds into everything else, making you feel solid. I don't know how else to say it. They make you feel like one solid, unbreakable mass of muscle and bone, capable of thriving in any condition and in any position. The stabilizers and all those unknown muscles seem to tie everything together. This is great for real-world strength because real-world conditions never repeat. Unlike with a barbell where every lift is the same, or is meant to be the same at least, when interacting with real-world objects, every lift and every interaction is different. Working with sandbags prepares your body for this by making your strength well-rounded. It's like a holistic strength in every possible way. Need to bend down and pick something up? Sandbags have you covered. Need to carry an oddly shaped thing slightly off-center? Sandbags have you covered. Need to reach completely to the side and catch a fast-moving object while for some reason carrying a person on your shoulders and eating a sandwich? Sandbags have you covered. Because they build the stabilizers in addition to everything else, sandbags make you stable. Next, I have to mention the core. This is tied to the stabilizer thing, but in a general sense, sandbags will give you a solid core that will not give way to pressure. This is important because the core is where energy goes to escape. Aside from the spine, the core has no bone to rely on for support, meaning the muscles themselves must do all the work of keeping the torso rigid. If those muscles are weak, then energy will be lost as it travels from the lower body to the upper body and back again. Loss of energy means loss of strength, which means you'll wear out sooner, making real-world tasks, which usually take many hours to complete, much more challenging. There's also the spine to consider. The core keeps it safe. It doesn't matter how much hypothetical strength you have with set gym movement patterns. If your core folds and you hurt your spine, you won't be lifting anything at all. In a real-world setting where you're often forced to lift from awkward and uneven bent-over positions, a strong core is essential for keeping the spine stable and free from injury. You will build a strong core doing basic barbell exercises too, but not usually a core that's strong in all directions unless you actively work towards that. Sandbags have that function built in, again because they're unbalanced and often force you to lift from awkward positions. There's also the biceps and the grip. By the way, when I say biceps, just assume I mean all of the elbow flexors. In the gym, most people assume the biceps are a show muscle, unnecessary for strength, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Disregarding the fact that this is a short-sighted view of lifting anyway, the biceps do contribute to heavy compound pulling movements, and to bicep curls, of course. There is a specific type of strength required to move awkward, real-world objects that you just won't get training in the normal way. In pretty much all real-world scenarios, you'll be forced to lift with bent arms, and rather than dynamic strength, like is required when doing rows or pull-ups, you'll need static flexed arm strength, often in a neutral position, and often with the wrists in a bent position too. The most basic example of this is carrying a person out in front of you. If you've ever tried it, I'm sure you noticed how quickly your arms wore out. It's not usually the back or the stronger parts of the body that give, it's the biceps and the grip. There are many other real-world examples of this too. When's the last time you kept your arms in a locked-out position when pulling weeds, when rowing a boat, climbing a tree, digging with a shovel, or carrying dog food? It's just the natural, efficient way of doing things. Sandbags build that strength. Also, just as an aside, if you've ever spent time doing real labor, you'll know that efficiency always wins out. You can go into a day trying to do things with, quote, optimal mechanics, keeping your arms locked out for some reason because that's what you learned to do in the gym with barbells, but after a couple hours, you will revert back to a bent arm position. It's the path of least resistance, and you will take that path when fatigued. If not on day one of a job, then somewhere down the road. Sandbags prepare you for real-world scenarios where, more likely than not, you'll end up doing things with bent arms. The same is true for the back too, by the way. In the gym, you typically try to keep your back flat, with most exercises at least, but in a real-world setting, a round back position is usually more efficient. Again, sandbags will train that. The flexed position applies to the grip and wrists too. In a typical gym routine, a lifter will probably never do any kind of lifting with bent wrists. The wrists are almost always in a neutral position. This is not true in real-world settings. To interact with oddly shaped things, you'll usually need to wrap your hands around them. It can take a lot of time for the muscles and tendons to adapt to this new position, and training with sandbags is a great way to cause that adaptation because you're often forced to lift with something resembling a false grip. Before moving on, I quickly want to add, I've had a few people say that Zercher lifts with a barbell would train the biceps for this too. I disagree. Zerchers are awesome, and I love them. Zercher pin squats are probably my favorite barbell exercise, but they do not make the biceps work in nearly the same way they do when lifting a bulky sandbag. If they did, we'd see way more bicep tears from Zerchers, just because you can load them so heavy, but we don't. At least, I've never heard of someone tearing a bicep from doing a Zercher lift. This comes down to where the weight is centered. Because barbells are skinny, all of the weight rests right in the crook of the elbows. To engage the biceps in the same way they're engaged when lifting sandbags, there would need to be some tension placed on the forearms, forcing the biceps to resist movement at the elbow, but there isn't. I'm not saying Zerchers don't probably have some positive effects on the biceps too, it's just not the same thing.
Hi, my name's Spencer. Firstly, I want to thank Cody for giving me the opportunity to be included in this video. Also, a little background is I've only been doing the Zercher lifts about 5 years or so now, and only the deadlift variation for about a year, and maybe the last 6 months doing it more frequently. Firstly, regarding the biceps, I agree pretty much 100% with Cody. There's next to no tension on the biceps during this lift. I think one of the common misconceptions is the way that the biceps look during the lift. So for example, the way that I advocate grabbing the bar is with the elbows flexed and then the hands supinated. And so when you do this naturally, the biceps are already going to look like they're turned on, which they are without any weight in your hand. So again, if I'm underneath it, and I'm here or crossed over or whatever, it looks like my biceps are my biceps are flexed, but there's no tension going through them. Okay, so the reason for this is obviously the forearm is the lever that controls the bicep. If you have weight out all the way here in your hand, let's say you have 150, 200 pounds and you're curling it, that's one thing. But even let's say how much weight you're holding with the Zercher, 3, 4, 5, 600 pounds in the elbow, there's almost no length there. So there's no tension on the bicep. Okay, also recently I had reached 1,000 subscribers, and for fun I tried to see if I could do a 1,000-pound Zercher lockout. And again, there was zero tension on my biceps with 1,000 pounds. A while back, after learning about Cody, he inspired me to go try to lift the biggest stone that I had seen after practice one day. And it's only weighed a few hundred pounds probably, but lifting the stone, even trying to keep my arm straight, but bending it slightly as I'm getting it to the lap, and also having it bent as I went up to my chest, I had danger signals going through my bicep just from doing that. And although I just got back into bicep training after not doing it for a couple decades, I've already got a 193-pound curl and a 146-pound weighted chin-up, so I don't think my biceps are weak by any means, but not being used to that movement of the stone definitely made my biceps feel sketchy. Whereas opposed to with the Zerchers, even with much heavier load, I don't feel anything. And recently I also had a failed Zercher where the bar rolled all the way down my arm. It was almost all the way at my wrist, and I still was just too stubborn to let go of it at that point in time. Probably had 500 pounds on there, still felt nothing in my bicep. Also, my next point, speaking about the core or the mid, the abs or the mid back on one of these lifts, contrary to what people usually think, I mean, the core's job is to pull you forward. So the only time the core really would be engaged if you were leaning back too far and your core was trying to bring you forward. For instance, on the Zercher, because you might have the option on a lighter weight of having the bar extended out in front of you, the only time you'll feel the core is when it's too far out with a lighter weight, and your core will be forced to exhale so the bar can move closer to your body. And again, it's all about where this bar can be, because it's so small, where it can be in relation to the center of mass. Again, when I did a 1,000-pound lockout, I felt nothing in my core. I felt nothing in my mid back or my upper back, as opposed to even just carrying my daughter who weighs 60 pounds, carrying her out in front of me, I feel a lot more on my mid back. As you can see, if I was going to lock out a Zercher, even if I could lean back slightly and have this bar pretty much in the center of my mass, and I should feel nothing, pretty much nothing, throughout the core or the lower back. But a sandbag or a stone, being so big, you just don't have the option. Even if you lean back a lot, you're still going to feel it in your back. In one way, I pretty much have the opposite approach to training as Cody. When I'm doing an exercise, I want to just be focused on one particular thing. When I do the Zercher, I'm not thinking about my biceps, my core. It's basically just a giant hip extension exercise where I don't have to think about anything else but how much power that I could put into the bar. So I'm here, and it's just a giant hip extension. Now, if you're lifting a sandbag or a stone, you're going to be expending energy on your crushing strength, squeezing strength, on the biceps, everything. Now, maybe over time you can build up this capacity so you could really train your legs and your back optimally, but there's going to be a learning curve there, and there's energy going to be expended toward that. And to summarize, to me, I don't have an agenda to push or to say, try this exercise, do that. To me, they're all tools, and they all have their own unique purposes. The Zercher can be really good for creating hip extension at through long ranges of motion, and some knee extension as well. And obviously the sandbags and the stones offer a lot more than just that. And again, I feel honored and grateful that Cody would ask for my opinion on this video. Thank you, everyone.
Lastly, I'd like to touch on endurance and muscle. I kinda hate when sandbags get labeled as an endurance tool. It's often talked about in this way as a negative thing. The barbell purist slides into those comments with a, "Cool, sandbags look like a great conditioning tool," as if to say, yes, they have a purpose. They'll never build as much muscle or strength as my barbell will, but hey, have fun. In fact, this was a big part of what got me set on making videos about sandbags years ago in the first place. I knew they had more to offer than just endurance, and I wanted to prove it. They do build endurance, a lot of it, and I'll get to that later, but first I'd like to talk about muscle. Something I've realized about myself and others who make sandbag videos is that we almost have to approach this topic from a place of defense. It's as if the best we could possibly hope for is to prove that sandbags build as much muscle as barbells, but never more. Some guys even preach sandbags while still clinging to the idea that they build less muscle. I wholeheartedly disagree. See, the problem is one of conditioning. Mental conditioning, I mean. We've all been raised in a world where isolation and the gym and scientific studies are king. It's been proven that barbells build a lot of muscle. Optimal has been studied endlessly and applied to what's popular because, well, it's what's popular. It's common knowledge that barbells work. This is true, but a lack of evidence in the other direction about sandbags doesn't prove they're inferior. It just means the studies haven't been done yet. Lack of proof does not indicate a lack of effectiveness. There are simply way fewer people using sandbags for muscle than there are those using other things. Even in my mind, I still sometimes find myself falling back on my conditioning, of just accepting that barbells build more muscle than sandbags. It's what almost everyone believes, yet my own experience shows otherwise. When I started training with sandbags, I put on more muscle in less time than I ever had when training 100% with barbells, aside from maybe my very first bulk when I was a complete beginner. What am I to believe? My own personal experience or what everyone else claims to be true? As sandbags become more popular, I think people will start to realize that, for certain areas of the body, sandbags might actually be superior. Barbells do have more overall utility. It's easier to isolate the arms with barbells, and I personally think pressing exercises are a bit more efficient, but for what they do, I'd be confident in saying sandbags are the way to go, because that's been my experience. This is why I recommend combining sandbags with other things, by the way. I like calisthenics myself, but sandbags and barbells, sandbags and kettlebells, there are many great options, and combining things together is, in my opinion, the path to the most amount of muscle. Talking about real-world strength, muscle is functional. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. It helps you do things, and when paired with a strong and mobile body, it keeps you safe from injury. Even in some kind of survival setting where the food is running out, more mass means more energy reserves. The idea that having muscle would cause you to die faster because you require more calories to maintain your size is missing the point. You don't need to maintain the muscle in that scenario. You can use it as energy. Why do you think being fat used to be a sign of wealth and status? It means a higher likelihood of surviving if the food runs out. Assuming, of course, you're not so massive you can't actually move. Becoming a 400-pound mass monster is one thing, but actual, real, natural muscle is useful to have. Of course it is. It drives everything and keeps your body functioning right. Finally, on endurance, because every single sandbag exercise is essentially full body, sandbags will get you out of breath in no time at all. They have endurance built into them, and I think that's pretty cool. This takes things full circle back to the start and makes for a good end. If true, real-world strength is the strength to endure uncomfortable circumstances for a long time, then real-world strength requires endurance, specifically strength endurance, and for that, it's tough to beat a heavy sandbag. Thanks for watching. If you want to know more about strength endurance, the attribute of someone who will survive in the real world wherever that may be, I recommend checking out the video I made recently on high-rep sandbag box squats. I truly believe it's one of the best I've ever made. If you're interested, I also just released my second book, Sandbag Intensity. It's a guide to high-rep sandbag training and goes into great detail on what I think is the ultimate high-rep sandbag training program. I'll have a link to the book on Amazon and to that video I mentioned in the description below. One final thing before I go, I just want to say again that I believe all training tools are valid. Many might not know this, but I trained with barbells for nearly a decade before I ever touched a sandbag, and I have a deep respect for the iron and for those who choose to pursue it. This was not an attempt at saying barbells or anything else is bad. Again, I just like talking about this stuff because it's fun.